Chapter 52, The Hidden Knife. The Hidden Knife. Imoen straightened the bright orange sash, the girl in the full-length mirror opposite mimicking the movement and then stooping as she did to brush the last few creases from the deep fuchsia skirts. The grain silk rasped against her dry hands. She should have taken more advantage of Fritha's offers of balm while she had had the chance. A bit of nipping to put a glow in her cheeks and a moment to refasten the blue stone pendant which she never went without, and Imoen gave up her preening to reach for the dresser. 2 noisy gulps downed a goblet of the wine the maid had appeared with when she had arrived to help her dress an hour ago, the girl bringing within her a cream gown in an older style, all puffed sleeves and ruffles. It had probably been found in haste in the clothes hamper of some long-departed family member, the maid looking relieved as she had walked in to discover Imoen's own dress hung over the wardrobe doors, letting the worst of the creases drop out from the good couple of months it had spent squashed at the bottom of her pack. Dinner would be called by a bell, it would not be long now. Imoen resisted the temptation to refill the dull silver cup, the mellow taste of a more expensive wine than she was used to lingering on her palate as she turned back to the mirror. She had once thought nothing could have looked better than her old hair, a match to her dress in sunset-hued pink, but the halo of dark chestnut curls suited her, muting the fuchsia silk and drawing the green from eyes which had once been overlooked in the vividness of her hair. The revelation left Imoen suddenly heartsick. Her hair had once been such a part of her and now it was no longer even mist. A knock at the door behind. Imoen turned to meet the two that entered, Jaehaera and Minsk both in their best tunics. Imoen wondered if the maid had bothered to even try and present a dress to the druid.
"You two look very smart."
"Indeed," dismissed Jaehaera.
"Are you ready?"
Imoen thrust a hand upon a silk-swathed hip.
"No, I've actually got a whole other dress to put on, what do you think?"
Jaehaera heard the nerves behind the terseness.
"Do not worry, Imoen. Farn is not the last noble in Tether with men at his disposal. That is the bell, come, we should not be late."
A maid met them as they filed into the hallway, the young girl tripping lightly at the head of their procession as she led them along labyrinthine corridors back down to the main floors of the keep. The room they finally arrived in seemed a sort of foyer, a set of large polished wooden doors carved with 2 coiled wyverns. The keep's heraldry dominated the opposite wall, while 4 couches were making a neat square about a low round table set with flowers. A few of the men Imoen had seen before were seated there, the rest milling about talking, or receiving drinks from the servants at the long oak sideboard which lined the wall next to them. The thick rugs yielded pleasantly underfoot as they entered the room. Imoen half wished she'd take her shoes off. Those assembled all seemed to turn as one at their arrival, her appearance provoking the obligatory compliments, though their words were as insincere as the smiles on their faces.
"Well, is this the same young woman as before?" "Indeed, and you are just in time. No banquet is complete without the company of a fair young lady."
Imoen suspected the fact she was a girl, fair or not, hadn't much to do with it. Most likely, they just saw the dress and the protocol kicked in. Certainly no one had yet dared make a similar fuss of Jaehaera. The woman stood at the sideboard wearing her best tunic and a frown.
"Why yes,"
added the barrel-like Tethyran Lord Imoen had seen earlier,
"I would have attended Farn sooner had I known we would be graced with such breathtaking beauty."
His language was so flowery as to make a mockery of the sentiment, and he likely knew it from the snide little smile he was sharing with his aide. Imoen resisted the urge to tell him to stick his compliment up his oversized arse and did what any proper lady would. She demurred and dipped her face. Jaehaera and Minsk were already in talk with a couple of the local nobles and Imoen's solitude was not missed. The 2 Kalimshite men, now dressed even more splendidly in silk kurtas of blue and green, their many jeweled rings and brooches glinting as they made their approach.
"Greetings, Imogen of Bergost, was it not?"
began the taller of the 2. His beard came to point on his chin, and he wore a large creamy pearl at one ear, his blue kurta covered in gold thread work and turquoise beads.
"You do not look as martial as I would have expected,"
he added with a nod to her much less extravagant gown. Imoen was heartily sick of comments about her appearance, and it left her brusque.
"Expected from what exactly?" "Why, from your arrival earlier,"
he clarified with a laugh.
"Though I understand the roads are dangerous enough in these times to warrant it. I am Zephyr and this is my partner, Alzine."
The pair bowed and Imoen dipped the expected curtsy.
"Nice to meet you." "Indeed,"
added his friend, his thick mustache waggling as he spoke,
"it is most pleasant to meet with you as well. Such pale northern flowers are rare here and rarer still in Kalimport." "Kalimport, is that where you are from?"
Alzine nodded, his pearl necklaces rattling.
"Yes, it is where the house we serve is situated."
"Serve?" Imoen exclaimed.
"I thought you were both princes in your own right." "Oh, no,"
laughed Zephyr.
"We are but humble emissaries to a great merchant prince of that city."
Humble might have been pushing it a bit, between them they were wearing equivalent to the crown jewels of Tethur.
"I suppose our appearance must make us seem more than we are,"
conceded Alzine.
"Indeed, we travel much more simply. Though we have guards, it is best not to tempt banditry." "So what are you doing so far from Kalimport?"
Zephyr smiled.
"Our prince sent us to strengthen alliances between our two lands. This trouble with the Ballspawn affects us all."
Imoen snorted. Subtlety really wasn't for her.
"Why haven't you gone to court then and spoken to the queen?"
The men shared an uncomfortable glance, Zephyr offering after a pause,
"You must understand our house does not act on behalf of the Pasha, we have no official capacity to approach the royal court." "But Farn is well reputed as a man of means and influence,"
added Alzine.
"It was decided our aid could be best used by him."
And Imoen could just imagine what they wanted Farn to do with their aid, and how much fertile Tethuran land would be relinquished as payment once it was his to bestow.
"But what of you?"
continued Zephyr, seemingly glad to change the subject.
"You carried a missive from the Silver Chalice, yet you are not their allies. What was it that brought you to the Duke?" "I wanted to ask something of him,"
Imoen offered evasively,
"but he refused." "Well, I am sorry to hear that. Perhaps our house could be of aid? As I said, we are here to strengthen ties."
Something in his manner, in the way both their eyes watched her so carefully, gave her pause. Imoen put on her best smile.
"You're too generous, but Farn has the influence here to better use your help." "Well then,"
smiled Zephyr,
"perhaps we can be of service in other ways. Our house deals in fine jewelries and we carry a few pieces with us for trade, perhaps you would like to visit our apartments before you leave to view them."
Alzine was suddenly nodding.
"Many of the ladies here, we note, do not adorn themselves as much as we are accustomed, though I must say I find the austerity pleasing in a way. It lets each piece shine on its own merits." "Indeed,"
added Zephyr,
"I notice you wear a fine pendant of your own." "Oh, thank you,"
Imoen answered, a hand moving self-consciously to the cool stone disc.
"Is it lapis lazuli?"
added Alzine. Imoen shrugged.
"I was never sure." "And it is inscribed with a symbol,"
he continued, peering closer.
"It has a meaning. The rune means twin, it was given to me by a friend, she has the other half." "Ah, a rune,"
repeated Zephyr wisely.
"There is power in runes." "There is power in friendships, too,"
came a gruff voice just over her shoulder.
"Though perhaps you do not feel you find such here."
The tall Tetheran who Imoen had first assumed was someone's guard had stepped up to join them. He was clearly a man of some importance in his own right, his tunic plain but of a good quality red linen that brought out the luster in his dark hair and eyes, though he was not looking at her then, his scowl focused on the two opposite.
I see you haven't brought your guards with you this evening. Ah, no,
faltered Alzine, adding jokingly,
a banquet is a time for talk and they do not speak Condathan so well as to add to the affair. You felt they were needed earlier? Or perhaps you just like having them stood about the place, a less gaudy show of wealth for our host.
The three men scowled at each other a moment longer before the Calamshites made their farewells and left, the warrior finally turning to her.
Don't mind them, Calamshites are all the same, they could look at a corpse and see only the gold in its teeth. I served with enough of them in the war. They aren't all like that,
Imoen reproached. He snorted but seemingly decided not to argue the point, instead thrusting a hand out for her to shake. It was rough but firm, rather like him.
We didn't speak earlier, I'm Dethan, the Crown's Justice based out of Castle Tether. Imogen of Beargost. Yeah, I'd heard you were from the north. You've come to see if you can get Farn to dance to your tune just like everyone else here.
Imoen saw little point in denying it.
His army makes him powerful here, I just wish he'd use some of that power to help Tether.
Dethan gave a great bark of laughter.
Ha! Spoken like a true foreigner and a naive one at that, since the war, Tether's main trade is politics. Zernda and the nobles would debate water over sand as Castle Dar Omar burned around them. Farn is one of the better ones, but even he won't act until something forces his hand. Then you've got Lord Baliano.
Continued nodding to the stout Tetheran and the handsome young man at his side.
That great fat swine, he'd see Tether fall just so he could pick over the carcass, and his aide, Carrion, is too charming by half. Plus a loads of other lesser nobles all jostling for favor. Throw those bloody Calamshites into the mix and I'd say a war is on its way whatever happens in the east. And why have you come here? Me? I came to ask Farn if he could spare any of his men for the additional patrols that are being raised for the Crown's highways. All over Tether mercs roam the roads, and bandits pick off the refugees as they flee, and now I hear stirrings along the edge of the desert. But the Duke refused me and won't send patrols outside his own borders. Says the Queen will view it as an act of treason. Tyr's severed hand, they are each as suspicious as the other.
The sound of the doors opposite cut him off, a tall servant appearing to clear his throat self-importantly.
My lords, dinner is served.
The dining room was very similar to the hall where they first met Duke Farn, though the walls were panelled in dark wood and the fireplace was in the back of the room. The flames were low and they cast an almost sinister glow about the high-backed chair on which Farn was already seated at the head of the table. They all took their seats with a minimum of fuss, the stout lord, his aide closest to the head, while a collection of minor nobles took their places at the other end. Minsk, Jahara, and she had been directed around the middle, opposite the Calamshites and the frowning Dethan. Servants were sweeping back and forth from the doors, each leaving a bowl in a seemingly endless procession of dishes. Olives in green and glistening black, snails in vinegar, anchovies in oil, pickled artichokes, and a variety of different breads. Those about her were eating heartily, but Imoen was having a harder time of it. She had tried a small green parcel which turned out to be a pickled vine leaf stuffed with rice, but the flavor was both sharp and bitter and she had never been keen on olives, and her plate ended up piled with assorted breads flavored with saffron, tomatoes, and rosemary. At the head of the table, a chair screeched back, Baliano heaving his blue velvet bulk up as he took to his feet, his cup in hand.
I should like to offer a toast to Duke Farn, a great host, someone I have the privilege to call a good friend.
Dithan caught her eye across the table, and Imoen had to work not to laugh at his grimace as she raised her cup with the rest of them, the man's eyes falling on the cup of the man next to him.
It's not much of a toast with only water, Sir Rizafir. Ah, we do not take wine,
said Alzine, hastily swallowing his mouthful to reply,
alcohol clouds the mind. Is that common in Kalimshan?
Asked Jahara, though from her tone Imoen could tell the woman already knew it was not. Bhaskar and the rest of the Amma had certainly been happy enough putting it away.
Ah, no,
explained Zafir,
but we are outside our lands on an undertaking for our house, we are expected to maintain readiness at all times. Readiness for what exactly?
Pressed Dithan. Alzine drew back, a glance travelling between the two Kalimshites.
Why, whatever may be required of us, if we have caused offence.
Alzine ventured, his attention now on Farn. The Duke smiled and inclined his head.
No offence was meant in this, I am sure, Dithan, and none was taken, Sir Raz.
Dithan turned his scowl back to his plate, and the conversation turned to the murmured pleasantries with one's neighbours that usually accompanied such dinners. Imoen did not even have that, with Minsk and Jahara sat on either side, and she let her eyes drift along the table. Baliano and Farn were laughing over something Carian had said, while at the other end of the table, local nobles dissected the rumours they had heard most recently and dismissed them all with ill-informed confidence. And she was not the only one watching these exchanges. Jahara was scanning the table too, above the bland smile, the woman waiting for a break in the conversation to address Baliano in mild tones.
My lord, I am told you hold lands to the southwest. We have friends journeying to the Stormantles, how are the roads that way? Will they face much trouble? No, no more than the usual,
he dismissed over his cup,
but once they cross the Silent River they will be outside my rule. And it is well known, the adjoining province has not the men to patrol all the roads,
added Dithan in a snap. Baliano seemed to swell, his already ruddy complexion almost glowing.
Something which, I regret, is outside my capacity to remedy. Well,
offered Zafir, an olive held halfway to his mouth.
In Kalimshan, it is said that the man who protects his home first will always have something to fight for.
He popped the olive into his mouth with a satisfied finality as many heads about the table began to nod. Dithan's was not one of them.
I am sure there are many who would agree with you, the tribes stirring along the north edge of the Kalim desert being one of them.
Sighs and snorts along the table, the two Kalimshites looking more concerned as Alzine ventured,
I have not heard of this. You have proof? There have been reports of raids across the border,
conceded Dithan mulishly as though he knew what reaction this admission would provoke.
More rumors,
snorted Baliano, Carian's laughter brightly derisive.
Who knew that as the Queen's Justice you had to investigate every tall tale, why you must be run ragged at the moment? I am the Crown's Justice,
Dithan corrected sharply,
not the Queen's, and I have a duty to the citizens of this land to investigate all reports of banditry, from wherever they may arise. I am surprised anyone can sift the fact from the rumors in these times,
sighed one of the nobles at the other end of the table, his older companions instantly seizing on this.
And that is exactly what those Amnians want. Oh, Rahid,
chuckled Farn,
not this again. You mark my words, I hear they've even let the Radiant Heart enter our lands under the guise of aiding the Silver Chalice. They probably work now, undermining our cities ready for the invasion. We all know what happened to Saradush. Well,
smirked Carian, leaning back in his chair,
our newest arrivals should be able to confirm that. What say you, Imogen? You were at their camp last.
Imoen glanced to Jahara and nodded once.
Yes, Knights of the Radiant Heart are here. I am friends with some of them actually, though if they were going to take Saradush, would it not have made more sense to do so when they had just fought battle on the field before it and the city was defenseless?
Oh yes, scoffed Rahid, the man gaining momentum as he remained the center of their interest.
The giant these knights claim to have fought. Honestly, every time I hear this tale something new is added. There is chaos in the east and refugees flood the west, all for some fantasy regarding a war between the Ballspawn.
Minsk was frowning, clearly tried to comprehend such willful blindness. Imoen could feel the heat building in her face.
We do not understand, you do not believe there was a battle there? Oh, there was a battle,
the man dismissed easily,
but it was no Ballspawn behind it. Ha, we all know how those knights like to brag. I bet it was little more than a skirmish before the walls, not a real battle.
Imoen's hands hit the table in a chime of cutlery.
Well, it felt pretty fucking real when I watched my friend burn on a pyre afterwards.
Silence. Baliano even stopped chewing. Farn cleared his throat.
Yes, well.
He turned slowly to the older maid standing ready against the wall behind him.
We'll have the next course now, Sophina. Short-sighted, selfing,
her sash was whipped off and dashed to the nearest chair, and, for an instant, Imoen felt within her stir a power that could have plunged that castle into screaming anarchy. And then it was gone, allowed to fade and shrugged away. They had come there to find allies, not add another front to their war. Perhaps a visit to the Queen herself would prove more fruitful, though they would have to return to Al-Hali empty-handed first. The thought held a bitter taste. Imoen made to pour herself a goblet of wine and ended up taking a swig from the jug instead, a whole night of having to behave making her even more inclined to bite her thumb at pointless decorum. People were going to die, could be dying right at that moment, and the nobles sworn to protect them were there playing stupid games. The door was too heavy to rattle, the knock resounding deeply through the thick polished wood. Imoen prepared herself for the imminent lecture, and stalked over to pull it wide.
Yes, Jahara, I know. I shouldn't, Carrion.
The handsome Tethiran sent her a feline smile.
You were expecting someone else. Well, whatever I was expecting, it wasn't you lurking outside my door like an escaped deviant.
He did not condescend to laugh.
Very droll. May I come in?
Imoen folded her arms.
What do you think? I think a young lady such as yourself is more than capable of taking me should my intentions prove less that noble. Taking you?
She repeated archly, even as she stepped back to allow him past.
Yeah, 'cause that phrasing's setting my mind at ease. All right, you're in.
She sighed, nudging closed the door behind him.
What do you want?
Carrion smiled up at her from where he was now lounged in one of the two padded chairs, idly playing with her orange sash.
The same thing as you, for Duke Farn to send his men east to meet Balthazar's forces. So you know about Balthazar, huh? Oh, yes,
he smiled knowingly,
and I know more than merely his name. For one thing, I know Balthazar has a half-sister on his father's side, who plans his downfall even now, Imoen.
Imoen snorted, wary but not yet afraid. After all, one wrong move and the man would be nothing more than a charred spot on Farn's fine Termish rug.
And how do you know that?
Another satisfied smile.
Because, acting on my suspicions, I just snuck into Farn's office and read the letter you brought him. He just left that lying around. No,
the man assured at her outrage,
it was quite securely locked in one of the drawers.
Imoen felt her eyes narrow.
Who are you? Well, fair's fair, a secret for a secret, I suppose.
He offered grandly, rising with the word to sweep a deep bow.
Am Meridian de Zeus, a spy in the employ of Her Majesty, Queen Zeranda. You're an agent for the Queen? And I'm just supposed to believe that, am I? Well, unfortunately, carrying the proof of such is a little risky in my profession. But does it really matter?
He offered, falling back into the chair.
The Queen needs Farn to aid in the fight against Balthazar, and so do you. And what about afterwards? Farn is worried the Queen will use the chance to usurp his rule here.
ARandomAudiobookAppeared laughed amiably.
Really? And what concern would that be to you?
It was like dinner all over again, that flash of unrepentant rage.
We didn't come down here to stop one conflict only to pave way for a civil war, you smirking bastard.
The man paused, the smile he wore fading, and it was as though he was suddenly seeing her in a whole new light.
You truly do care what happens to Tethur, don't you? I had thought you merely here to preserve your own brethren, not normal people.
Imoen took an involuntary step towards him, hands planted firmly on her hips.
My brethren are normal people. I am sorry,
he hastened,
a poor choice of words. Please, will you hear me out?
He gestured to the bed opposite. Slowly, Imoen sank down upon the velvet counterpane.
We agree that Balthazar must be stopped, and Farn has the means to do this. The Queen may have asked the Silver Chalice to remain here, but only because her forces to the east are stretched as it is keeping order in the panic that grips the cities and towns who are waiting to be the first target, and she knows enough of Lord Balliano and his ilk to know they will be waiting for any sign of weakness to betray her. Believe what you will about the Queen and her methods, but she does not want to see her people embroiled in another civil war. Well, neither does Farn,
snapped Imoen.
And he'd send troops east if he wasn't worried about her.
ARandomAudiobookAppeared nodded gravely.
No, and I believe it, but his allies are not so noble and plan to manipulate a situation where his hand is forced to their advantage, and Tethur's ruin. Lord Balliano works even now with those Kalimshite emissaries. They plan to orchestrate an attack between them on the lands which border the Kalim Desert, with all evidence pointing to the tribes who dwell within it. The excuse will be given that they are merely taking advantage of this war in the east as a distraction to acquire better lands. The tribes in the desert don't want Tethur's land or anyone else's,
snorted Imoen.
The desert is their home.
ARandomAudiobookAppeared looked mildly impressed.
I am surprised to hear you speak so. You have had experience of the desert peoples? Either way, it is an excuse most citizens, the other nobles included, can believe in. As the only noble who kept a standing army after the war, the southern provinces will beg Farn for aid and he will rally his men against this obvious threat. With Farn's troops south, I doubt anything will keep the Silver Chalice from the battle lines. They will move east as I know Amaniti has been petitioning her prelate for a while. In the meantime, Balliano will move mercenaries in to occupy the villages which border Farn's province in the guise of Tethuran soldiers who, by all appearances, would be under instruction of the Queen. All Farn's fears as to Zeranda's treachery will seem proved by this. He will be in the south with his army, this force suddenly free as the attacks on the southern provinces are easily quelled. Balliano and the Kalimshites will offer what support they can, and this alliance will take the west, almost bloodlessly I imagine, while the Queen and Silver Chalice is still occupied with Balthazar to the east.
Imoen leaned back from those intense black eyes.
You know a lot about this. I should,
he shrugged.
I have shared Balliano's bed for the last few months.
Her freckled nose creased.
You, with that fat slug? I hope Zeranda pays well. She does, though I do not act here for that, but for my country. Indeed, a whole country, which begs the question, why would Kalimshan risk war with Tethur in this plot?
ARandomAudiobookAppeared frowned.
My investigations into this have proved unfruitful, but I doubt these men represent those who rule that land. They are merely opportunists seeking wealth and power outside their own borders.
Imoen stared at him, trying to find the truth in his words. She risked so much on nothing more than a tale.
I'm sorry, but you could be anyone, with any agenda. For all I know you could be working for Baldur himself. Without some proof.
She trailed off. ARandomAudiobookAppeared sent her a weary smile, the man reclining back to cross one leg over the other.
The same problem you have likely been facing for a while, as well, I imagine. I suppose, in the end, someone is going to have to take something on faith.
Faith, everyone seemed to speak of it lately. The children had had it in Melisson. Her friends had it in their assorted gods. And, it seemed, by naming her as leader of their ill-fated resistance, Frithha had it in her. Imoen shook her head, defeated.
All right, what do you need?
This, ARandomAudiobookAppeared smiled, withdrawing a large gold medallion from his doublet, a curled wyvern etched in relief upon its surface.
This is the Duke's seal, another of my acquisitions of the evening. I need you to plant this, as well as a few letters I have forged in the bureau in Baldur's rooms. Forged? You don't have any actual evidence. Plenty,
the man grinned,
but this is something different. The letters are by Farn. These with the seal will make it look as though Baldur has been forging Farn's support. Something to guarantee he never gets it. All right,
Imoen muttered, weighing the bright gold disc appraisingly.
And what will you be doing while I risk my neck? I plan to be with Baldur, keeping him distracted and assuring my alibi once this comes to light. Good plan,
Imoen snorted.
I can see why the Queen picked you for this. I know,
he laughed.
The Seneschal is already suspicious of me, I have made sure of that. In my perceived guilt, Baldur's rooms will be searched, the evidence, both false and true, found and the plot discovered. But how will any of this make Farn send his troops east? I am sure once his most trusted friend is exposed as a liar who holds no loyalty to Tethur, the Duke will see reason and ally with the Queen for the good of the people.
ARandomAudiobookAppeared smiled, but for the first time it was unguarded, a look of genuine hope.
So you will aid me?
Imoen sighed and extended a hand for him to shake.
I will.
Outside, the echoed howl of distant wolves was just enough to bring Imoen round again, his body jerking from the cusp of sleep. In his lap, the book still rested, though it had been a while since he had turned a page. He had lost interest in the account of the northern campaigns hours ago, each page from there read only as a bargain with himself. After this page he would retire whether Frithha had returned or not, pages turning into chapters in his futile vigil. With a sigh, he shifted, easing out stiff limbs to cross to the washstand, but the cool water he splashed across his face only made him feel worse, his eyes like burning coals in his head, hot and gritty. An aura of cold hung about the heavy curtain beside him, a desire to plunge his face within seeing the curtain pulled back. The once clear glass was opaque black marble and he pressed himself to the window, letting the curtain close and block out the light of the room behind to open, at last, the dark landscape outside. The moon was low, a faint crimson sheen to its usual pallor, and its light opened a jagged path across the pines. In the barn across the clearing, a soft yellow light glowed through the fine cracks where the wooden planks did not sit quite flush. He watched the light bobbing back and forth like a wisp, the effort to focus on something making his tired eyes water. With a sudden determination he stepped back from the glass. Frithha would thank him in the morning. He marched down the stairs, hardening his heart as he went, readying himself for the drunk cry of not yet and the pleas for him to stay and at least have one with them, and he stepped into the common room and stopped dead. The room was all but empty, only one table occupied by men he had spent the last few days traveling beside, the mercenaries looking up as he appeared. Fritha was not among them. The demand, ground out through gritted teeth, left none there in any doubt as to his burgeoning anger.
Where is she?
A glance shifted between the men, a no-man hauled the nearest to his feet in an explosion of ale and shouting.
Tell me now. All right,
choked the man struggling in his grip.
She went out with Jar to check on the horses.
The man hit his chair once more, a no-man leaving the chaos of spilled drinks and riled tempers to throw open the main door. The cold hit him like a hammer's blow, lungs burned and eyes streaming as he cut through the darkness. Across the yard, warm light streamed from the barn doors, a no-man assaulted by the jumbled imaginings of what he was to walk in on. A sudden scream split the night. He doubled his pace, barreling through the open doors to find them together in a pool of light. The animals stalled there watching the scene with stoic interest. Jar was sprawled on his back in the gravel and scrambling frantically away from the girl who was looming over him, a billhook snatched from the vicinity in her hand.
I said, no.
She was not shouting at the captain though. Fritha slightly hunched, a hand hovering at her temple as she turned her back on them and continued her fight.
No, I told you, I won't.
A no-man's eyes snapped instantly to the crumpled figure beneath her.
What have you done, Jar?
Nothing, he faltered, eyes flicking for the briefest instant to the long smoking pipe discarded next to him on the gravel. A no-man snatched it up before the man could grab it. A frail tendril of smoke was curling from the shredded leaves within the bowl, redolent of cloves and burnt leather. He had been there with the order when the Athkatla guards had seized a crate of the stuff from a ship out of Kalim port.
Black Lotus, you fool! It was only a bit,
Jar snapped, scrabbling back from them both.
Just enough to relax her. Does she look relaxed to you?
A no-man paused, weighing the risk to their aliases as his attention returned to the girl now muttering quietly to herself,
Fritha.
She whirled, the billhook raised. Eye with pupils so large they were almost black darted up to find him, and bloomed larger still.
A no-man. Are you?
She touched his arm, unable to stifle the cry as she found him solid. Her face lit and in a heartbeat she went from astounded to elated to suddenly exhausted, her small frame curling in on itself.
I'm cold.
She did not even seem to register as he placed a hand upon her back.
Come on, come back to the inn.
The billhook struck the gravel with a dull clatter, the rasp of Jar scrambling to his feet following them as they stepped back out into the darkness. End of chapter.